Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest, the official podcast of the Brock Press, where we take you beyond the headlines and do a deep dive into some of the many interesting articles, written by our team this week. My name is Noah Nickel. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brock Press and host of the latest, and today I'm joined by our managing editor, Holly Morrison, and one of our sports and wellness editors, Morgan Vidakovic. I got it right again. There we go. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing pretty great. Sun's out. Well, it was out. And I feel like when the sun's out, it's just going to be a good day. And I get to be on the podcast again, so.
I'm also doing pretty good. Sun was out. It went away, but it looks like it'll be back. So that is nice. It's warming up. Back to in-person classes, so lots of good stuff.
Yes, exactly. We're coming back to life here in Ontario.
I forgot that
days are
school
getting
goes
longer. Yes. Yeah. all coming back again, which is what it is. But hey, it still is nice to get out of the house have more reasons to get out of the house, so. But yeah, everything's kind of getting a little nicer. Hopefully that big snow fall holds off. But, days I think are getting longer. It's a little bit warmer. You get to see more of the sun lately. And, there's, truckers converging on the country's capital. So, things are really nature's healing. Things are getting back to normal. But in all seriousness, this was another really good week for articles. Had tons to go read on our website. If you haven't already, it's www.brockpress.com. We talk about upcoming video game releases, Black History Month events happening at Brock and elsewhere. Good and bad movies to watch for Valentine's Day, vacant housing issue in Toronto, and so much more. So be sure to check those out. But without further ado, we will get into our topics for the podcast. So the first article we're talking about today, pretty unavoidable, I would say, is the Freedom Convoy nonsense going on in Ottawa. Sorry to share my opinion already, but Devani talked about the trucker convoy. They're still stationed in Ottawa as of recording. They're waiting for Trudeau to remove all COVID-19 related mandates and restrictions, despite most of those falling under a different jurisdiction. But that kind of segues into my editorial, which was also about the convoy, but obviously is less dealing with kind of relaying the facts and more just talking about how a lot of it's misguided. And there's, really big cracks in that movement that just kind of make it something that people shouldn't really at all be getting behind, even if they aren't interested in mandates and things any longer. But with that, we'll get into some discussion. So just curious what either of you, or well, both of your kind of extent of knowledge is about the whole trucker convoy situation.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of hard to, avoid learning about it. I guess if you're, watching the news or, scrolling social media or anything like that, you're going to hear about it, even if it's just sort of people talking about it in, the broader sense. But I think I, really first heard about it when I saw people sort of sharing things about it on Facebook, talking about, freedom and stuff, and I was, kind of, mostly disinterested in that. I was like, okay, this is just another, Facebook anti-lockdown meme. I see those all the time from certain people. But yeah, I think as it progressed, learned a lot more about it. Learned, I guess, the sort of shadier parts of it, how some of the organizers are generally not truckers, which I think sort of points out some of the cracks in it. But yeah, sort of just heard about it through generally being aware of what's going on around me.
Yeah, I think the same goes for me. I don't really follow the news. I don't know why. I've never been really present in the news ever, but my best friend is super into this whole trucker convoy that's happening right now. So I feel like being around her and listening to her and like having actual conversations. She's one of those people who's like so open-minded, but still believes like what she believes. So it's really cool to have conversations with someone who really supports it, but also hear why she understands why people don't support it. So I feel like in the past week or so, I've really been able to educate myself on everything that's happening, because I just didn't really know to the extent of like who, like, for example, who was running it, like who's supporting all of this stuff. But I just think like the world is crazy right now. And all I can think about is all these trucks and everything blocking the road. And like, if there's emergencies, how are EMS vehicles going to get there? Like, that is just like what's constantly going on in the back of my head, as I'm thinking, like, what if something happens and like nobody can get there to help these people because the roads are blocked? And I know that's like the smallest of all the problems, but I just can't like get it out of my head. And I just hate when people make things that, like, for example, this is fighting for like a major issue, but then they bring up like a million other issues and they're like, oh well, now no one cares about these issues. But I just hate protests, and I hate really like right-winged people. But also don't want to get too deep into my opinion. But
Well, you mentioned the EMS issue, which is something that I've heard from some people in Ottawa, because obviously that's a big center for news. So like the news people I follow on Twitter, but also some friends and other people I know who are in there and around that area. I've been posting just how hectic the streets are and how impossible it really is to get around, despite, efforts to kind of control traffic and kind of set up. Well, the setting up of blockades is kind of making it almost worse in some instances, because then, streets are, sure, they've been kept empty, which I guess is good. You avoid there being any issues there. But at the same time, it just makes traversing everything so much harder. So yeah, there has been a big concern about emergency vehicles in all of this, which is, yeah, there's always so many externalities with protests that people planning them and taking part in them don't realize. Whether it's good or bad protests in terms of like what they're actually fighting for, in terms of my opinion on it. There's any type of mob like that is and I don't mean mob in like a sense that they're necessarily like a big violent rioting crew of people, but just when you have that many people together, there's going to be people causing trouble and people that aren't believing the same things as you. And it's just, I don't know, it's always hard to keep those things focused and totally valuable in a sense. So in a sense, I do agree with you, Morgan. I do think there's value in protesting, but I see what you're saying is that so much of the time they can totally get derailed, and it just has, and also the externalities that they don't think of.
No, of course. And like, there's people in this world who have those horrible, I don't want to say mentalities, but they have these horrible ways of thinking, that these ridiculous beliefs that are so just like, for example, the white supremacists, like these people. So the whole protest going on, they want to fight for rights, they want to do all these things, but it gives those white supremacists a platform to voice what they believe in. And that's not the point of this protest. And like, that's what's just like blowing my mind, is that obviously like the truckers and everything, they're trying to accomplish something great and something, positive, but it gives all of these horrible people who live in the shadows or don't live in the shadows and voice their opinion regularly, but it gives them a platform to just put all that negativity out into the world. And the media is so consumed by like covering the negatives, I think. And like, I'm in this one Indigenous voices and perspectives in the media class, and like we've been talking about this for whatever the past 2 weeks, because it's like the media is so obsessed with sharing the bad things, and like that's what's getting all the attention. So it's a shame that obviously, yes, the trucker convoy is getting a bunch of positive media representation, but like the bad things are getting so much more, and it's just like, it just sucks.
I also think like what it comes down to for me is like, I personally like never really supported the whole, I guess, the movement. I can certainly like understand sort of where it started, just the idea that like truckers in general in Canada and the world, you know, are put into very, very dangerous situations all the time. They definitely don't get a lot of the support that they need, and they really, really have not during COVID. But what the whole protest seems like to me is it doesn't seem like it's centering the voices of the people who sort of need it. Like a real protest for like the rights of truckers and for, you know, working class people, I don't think it would center vaccination, because 90% of truckers in Canada are vaccinated. It's like a very vocal 10% minority who aren't. And also, you know, you need the like insane thing about it is that it's only one side. Like removing the vaccine exception for truckers is America still has the requirement that truckers have to be vaccinated to enter America. Like it's not going to change anything. So I think what really, like the way that I see it at least, is that it's sort of like there's this thing that sort of like alt-right people and far-right people will do, is where they will sort of take the aesthetic and the issues of like a working class group, and they'll infiltrate that, and they will use that to spread really dangerous, really sort of racist, you know, misogynistic, bigoted rhetoric. And that's sort of what I have seen this whole trucker convoy thing be really at its core what it's about. Because I like the demands of, I guess, the movement don't make a lot of sense. You know, it really seems like they didn't know what they were going to do once they got there. It seems like, I don't know, it just seems like a bunch of people who were like, yeah, freedom. But then you sort of say, freedom to what? Freedom from what? You know, who's in charge here? And to me, it does really seem like it was, again, the working class aesthetic and the working class problems that were sort of co-opted by a different, much more dangerous movement.
Yeah, the people that are actually in charge, not to say that they, because again, that stuff's hard too. Like technically there was, not to equate the two protests, but in terms of just another protest example, there was technically leaders of Black Lives Matter, but like those protests were happening everywhere. So like, yeah, there's technically leaders of the trucker convoy. People collecting money for sure are in major leadership position, and some people who were part of the initial organization, but obviously it's outgrown those people in certain respects. But anyways, those people's views, a lot of those are exactly what you're saying, totally off, out of left field, and totally quite often in the past that we've seen from them, you know, racist and offensive in myriad other ways as well. But yeah, some of their plans coming to Ottawa were like to have the Governor General dissolve the Parliament or some nonsense, and like install a government not based on, you know, which party won the most seats in the House, or basically completely subverting the entire Canadian democracy, which is just absurd. And so that was one plan apparently, but I kind of have to take that a step further. And Holly, you kind of mentioned it, is that they, you know, they co-opted people's, you know, just kind of what I mentioned. I actually mentioned in my article that they're being upset that they can't, you know, go to Boston Pizza and get drinks and appetizers. Like it was, I kind of said that in like a jokey, like derogatory way to kind of slight those people a little bit, but in essence, a lot of that's true. It's like that is the extent of their, and I put this in air quotes, freedom that is being curtailed, right? It's like, yeah, it's annoying that we close restaurants every few months. I think we should be done with it. I've said that before. I've said that in other articles. But like, that is what is worth overthrowing the government and like putting your name on, you know, signing your name to this wacko protest movement that's filled with complete lunatics and horrific politics, and you know, these people pissing on war memorials and like just crazy stuff. You know, not that you can account for every single thing that every person does, but to, you know, to align yourself with that because you want to go out for dinner, it's absolutely crazy to me. Like they totally lost the plot on this whole thing, and really, you know, I don't know what's left to be redeeming of the trucker air quotes on trucker as well because of how few truckers are actually involved. But I don't know what's redeeming left of this trucker convoy.
Yeah,
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that like history repeats itself, and like something that we all know is that rage-filled like anti-government types, they just can't be reasoned with, and it's, I don't know, it just seems like they think they're there fighting for something, but it's just something else. And people who are supporting it are very like, they cling on to that first message they get and they think, oh, like this is going to make a huge difference and everything's going to be fine, we're going to have our rights back. But like, I'm not, like, something that bugged me from before is, I don't know if you guys ever saw this, but there was this group of people who would walk around with like little yellow stars on them, and they would say like non-vaccinated or whatever, and they were comparing themselves to the Jewish people living in the ghettos during like Hitler's reign in Germany. And I just think that's so crazy. Like, obviously people getting fired from their jobs for not being vaccinated, that's a huge thing, but I just don't understand how these people are like oppressing themselves. Like, they're making it seem like, everyone is labeling them for not being vaccinated or whatever. Nobody cares. If you can't go to the restaurant, that's fine. If you can't, whatever, like, okay, we're vaccinated, we can do this, but you can't. Like, I don't know. Like, these people, I just feel like they're making it into something so much more than it actually is. And that's where all of the, that's where all of this crazy wacko energy is coming from. Because they're trying to create something more than it actually is, I think. If that even made sense.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. Online, they're just stirring people into frenzies about this stuff, and it's just totally offside and just totally inaccurate. I mean, the choice to be vaccinated or not, again, is a choice, is an important word. Whereas, well, I mean, not that. I guess I will debunk this or refute this idea that people have put forward. But Jews were persecuted in Germany not because of any decision they made, but because of characteristics of themselves that they had no control over, right? Because of their partly religious affiliation, but at the time it was more so considered like a genuine biological distinction in humanity, and the difference between a full and subhuman. So I mean, it's not at all comparable. Obviously,
that's not that means.
Yeah, well,
how
exactly.
can they even compare those things? Like, it's those extremists.
Out of taste.
Yeah.
Anyways, Holly, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. I was just gonna say, I saw something like the other day that sort of like stuck with me about sort of conspiracy theorists and people who get sucked into these kind of strange, sort of nonsensical, I guess, political movements. And it's that people don't get sucked into like the alt-right or conspiracy theories because they're lied to. People generally are smart enough to figure out when they're being lied to. They get sucked in because people tell them half-truths. So people will cling on to something that does exist, a problem that people do have, and then they'll make it into something that it's not, to sort of get people to believe this sort of like terrifying, terrible ideology. And obviously, like, that's not to excuse any of the terrible things that people have done in the name of these ideologies, but it's really sort of just dangerous and scary the way that seemingly reasonable people can sort of be brought to believe, that it's okay to bring a swastika to the Capitol, or like that it's okay to say terrible, horrible things just because you personally do not want to be vaccinated. So this week, one of the opinions that I wrote was about the recent Joe Rogan Spotify controversy thing that's been happening. Pardon me. Basically, if you haven't seen it, several big music artists, I guess like the biggest names right now are Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, have sort of requested that their music be pulled from Spotify because Spotify sort of allows and also, is affiliated with financially Joe Rogan's podcast, and it airs sort of uncensored, and both he and his guests spread a lot of sort of COVID-19 misinformation, a lot of rhetoric that they say is dangerous. So I guess I just wanted to ask you two, first of all, did you hear about this and what did you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of, well, the whole politics world is kind of a tangentially related world to Joe Rogan. And like before Spotify, genuinely, I did listen to him on Apple Podcasts, but I mean, that's just the podcast app I use. I wasn't crazy about him enough to follow him when he moved, but I mean, I would watch ones when the names kind of struck me as someone I knew, or I read the description and it was interesting. And yeah, so I've been up on this stuff a little bit, but I'll kind of let Morgan say her bit on it before we get really into it.
Yeah, I've never really been a listener of podcasts. Like I started listening to our podcast because I don't know, I thought it was cool, but I don't really listen to anything when I drive. I just sit in silence. But I don't really have an opinion on it, other than I did see on social media, I think it was a post about him claiming that, I don't know if this is right, sorry Holly, correct me if I'm wrong, but like healthy young people don't need to get the vaccine, like stuff like that. Is that kind of what he was saying?
Yeah, he said something like, he was like, I'm not anti-vaccine, but like, if a 21-year-old comes up to me who's healthy and says, should I get vaccinated? I'd tell them no. And just that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's, I think, what the sort of artist's issue with it was. Two artists who, are a little bit older, two artists who survived polio in childhood, so, can see maybe why they'd want to make that stand.
No, for sure. And I think that Joe Rogan is famous enough that I don't listen to podcasts and I kind of know who he is. So I feel like a lot of impressionable people listen to him, or he probably has a huge audience. And I feel like him putting these messages out into the world, certainly like some people could resonate with that, but it could be offensive and detrimental to some people and like change their views, for example,
So yeah, I guess the next thing that I wanted to ask, and I think, Noah, this ties into what you were going to say, is do you think that like Spotify as a platform should be able to censor, the podcasts on that platform? We're talking about Joe Rogan in specific, but also like just in general, should they be able to do that?
I will not take credit for this idea, but I kind of liked how it was phrased by a political commentator I watch pretty regularly. He said that a platform like Spotify should, at the end of the day, serve mostly the same function as like a public bathroom wall, or like the stall divider in a public bathroom. And it sounds it's a bit of a crude analogy, but I did like it just because I think their best role, or like their best function, is to essentially just be a place to host this content for people. That's not to say they do that now. They engage in a lot of curation, which I don't think they should. So yeah, but I also, in the same sense, I don't think that censoring content like Rogan's or anyone else's is the right move. He just happens to be the largest example of that, the clearest example. But any other content that these platforms curate, which they do heavily, and not just Spotify and not just podcast platforms, like YouTube for sure is hugely guilty of this. But yeah, I don't think that's the correct way to go about things. Censoring in either direction or anything of the sort. They really should be as neutral as possible. Honestly, I think their neutrality should be legislated, but that's another kind of issue.
I think I can agree with that in a sense and like see where you're coming from. I think with like Joe Rogan in specific, one of the reasons that sort of he was the guy that got like focused on is one, that he is so big, his episodes get so many listeners, but also two, that like Spotify like monetarily supports him. They have financially backed this podcast. You know, they paid a lot of money to be sort of the exclusive home of the Joe Rogan show. And so what that does is, you know, it gives this podcast an almost corporate endorsement, even if, you know, they say like, we don't agree with everything that Joe Rogan says. They are still making him a very rich man to say those things. So I think that's where, especially in this case, it becomes a little bit different to me. I also think like just generally, you know, I do view Spotify as like an internet place, and I guess my general opinion on internet places is like you have a right to be there, but also the people who run it do have, you know, the right to kick you off. You're not entitled to that.
I also think that by Spotify, okay, so when Noah explained his opinion, I was like, okay, maybe I agree with that. Like, I don't think that Spotify really needs to censor it. Like, there's no point. But then after what Holly just said, now I'm thinking maybe I feel like there's a bigger picture. Like, obviously, censoring Joe Rogan's work would impact who watches it, or maybe it would attract a different demographic. But at the same time, like, Spotify's indirectly supporting everything he says, whether he's spreading controversial things about COVID or misinformation or whatever it is he wants to say. Like, Spotify's supporting that. And what does that say about Spotify now? What does that say about all of these corporate things? Like, I just feel like it goes so far beyond just censoring his video or not censoring his video or voice podcast things. Sorry, not videos.
I think that is true in this case because they paid Joe. And so he's they paid him about $100 million, I believe, to go exclusive with Spotify. And so I get that they should, you know, ride out the benefits of that and, you know, take on the consequences. Of course, I don't think people are unjustified in, like, I don't think Neil Young or Joni Mitchell or their states or representatives or whatever are unjustified in wanting to take down content if they want to do that, or if people are, you know, getting rid of their Spotify subscriptions if they so choose to do that. That is people's prerogative to do that. But for the most, well, again, my ideal world is that no one's paying anyone for this type of content, right? They're just platforms to allow you to upload content is my preferred way things are done. I know that's not how it's done in this case, but preferably I think that's the way it should be done. And in that instance, then no, I don't think, or in those cases, they shouldn't be policing content. But like a platform like YouTube, for example, is engaging in a lot of the same, well, not the same behavior because Spotify hasn't done anything. They haven't censored Joe Rogan, but they are actually censoring content on their platform, which, you know, whether they pay for the content or not, whether it's just uploaded by someone like you or me, although we likely wouldn't upload content that gets taken down, but you know, they just by average people is what I mean, and they're engaging in actual censorship. They are actually censoring the content on their platform. And in that instance, I think that's totally wrong, as I would in the Spotify case, personally, even though I know it's a little bit of a different situation given that he is a paid entity. But to a degree, I think it still does kind of stand. I do think that these platforms are best to serve as just basic springboards where, you know, the companies are free of liability, which they are legally. At the moment, they are free from liability for the content posted on their platforms. What it might not appear that way to us, right? As both of you said, they have to wear that, right, as part of their brand. But in terms of the legal system, they are free from the liability for the content posted on their platform. So I do think that's the right thing. But I do understand how this situation and how Joe is paid a lot of money for his content is, you know, it makes it trickier.
I was just gonna bring up, I I just feel like it's not that much different than, like, he's a controversial person. A lot of times he'll, like, I now that I'm thinking about it, I remember watching something about him kind of like explaining why veganism isn't ideal or whatever. And I just feel like this is no different. Obviously, COVID is a really big thing right now. And like, even on Instagram, anytime you want to click or share or whatever, like, even if you're posting something on your story that has anything to do with COVID, there'll be that little like gray bar that comes up on the bottom. It's like, this information is containing information about COVID-19. Do you want to share anyways? Like, I feel like that kind of makes you, for example, me, like, that made me second guess posting some of my story once. So I was like, okay, is this the message that I want to put out about my opinion? But I feel like this isn't any, like, he's just a controversial person who's constantly kind of like trying to be devil's advocate or trying to put that, you know, think about this a little bit more out there into the world. So I feel like this can't really be any different, even though it is like super big right now because of COVID. I don't know. I think I'm just gonna like stay on the fence about this one.
I think like what it comes down to for me is like, and like I just said this, and like I think I said it last week even, like, nobody is entitled to a platform. That is one of the things that I believe. The only platform that you really are entitled to is like, if you want to sort of like stand on your front porch and like yell stuff. I think that any platform that is hosting any content has a right to remove your content if they, you know, for any reason. I guess that is just how corporations and content sharing platforms work in the society that we live in. I don't think that anyone is entitled to a platform. I don't think that, you know, free speech covers your right to upload a podcast spreading medical misinformation. And that's just something that I believe.
I agree with you. In the way that things currently are constituted, you are absolutely correct. And the platforms have all the power to keep what is or not is, or keep up or take down what's on their platform. Sorry, I don't know why I completely tripped over that so badly. But yeah, they definitely do have that right currently, and the legal right to do that. As someone who, in pretty much all my articles, for the most part, I tend to be aspirational in that I try to identify things that I don't like the way they're currently constituted and recommend ways that they could be improved. One, I think, is increasing the democratization of the internet. I think is a huge thing. Taking power away from these massive companies like Spotify, like Amazon, like Apple, like Facebook, all these companies that have huge stranglehold on the internet and strangleholds on these private platforms that, in terms of their, you know, reach and their use in our modern society, are in essence public, in that they should be public. Not that they are legally. I do understand the distinction, and again, Holly, you're absolutely right. They are not public platforms; they are private. But I think my aspirational side tells me I need that needs to change. We need to move towards greater regulation of the internet from the government in terms of regulation of companies, not regulation of individuals. I don't think that is good, because I think that the role of the internet, it's taken on a much greater, far outsized role in our society in offering a true public platform than we might have originally anticipated. And so, yeah, I do think we need changes. I get that. And the way it's currently constituted, absolutely, they are within their right. If they choose to remove Rogan, which they haven't, Spotify is totally in their right to do that. And it's not, and definitionally, it's not censorship. It's not, infringing on any of his rights, obviously. But do I think it could be improved that if these platforms are made to play a smaller role in curation? Yeah, I do think that would be better. And Rogan might not be the best example of it, because he's spreading negative information in this case that's likely has actually cost lives, which is not funny, but you know what I mean. It is likely has had dangerous consequences for people, and this isn't the first time he's done that. COVID or his views on trans people. participating in sport, for instance. He's caused harm for sure with his massive platform. But to give the role of curation and content management to these private companies, to me, is not good. It doesn't sit well with me, and so I'd much rather it be freer than more restricted by these kind of private oligarchs that essentially run the internet.
Yeah, I mean, when you're bringing up sort of just the idea that the internet should be free, I think the internet very much used to be like that. It was like a very democratized place. It was a place where, anyone could put anything anywhere. And like to an extent, it still, that still does exist. Spotify taking down Joe Rogan's podcast, or, voiding the contract that he signed with him. That wouldn't mean that he can't ever produce the podcast. There's nothing to stop him from, buying a web domain. So I guess in that sense, I think, if you want to move away from the sort of just like corporations having this like stranglehold on the internet, I think that is very much possible. I don't know if like making private companies public, like having publicly on Spotify, is quite the way to do that, because that's not quite the way that, it was back in the wild, wild west days of the internet. But that's a little bit of a tangent.
Yes, and to keep tangenting, to keep going off topic, ideally, yes, I do think that there would be literally public platforms, literally open government platforms. But in the case of what's way more likely would be that we might see, private platforms like they have now regulated, like we do utilities, which are also privately run, like electricity, for example. It's privately run, but it's highly regulated because, access to electricity and power to people's homes is considered a public utility. So that's even just a middle ground approach that I think would be beneficial for all of us, because, yeah, today it is Rogan's COVID misinformation, and it's, obviously I'm not interested in defending the content of what he said. He said a lot of nonsense. He had a lot of terrible guests who said worse stuff on COVID-19. I'm not trying to defend the content of what was said, but just not knowing, but just investing more power into companies like Spotify. I don't trust them, because they don't have my interests in mind. They have Spotify's interest in mind, right? They have their own interests as a company. So I'd rather the internet have the interests of people, and have that. Obviously, to do that requires government intervention. But yeah, I'd much rather the internet have people's interests in mind, rather than allowing these humongous companies to run the internet with only their interests in mind.
Yeah, that's definitely like part of what I wrote about in the article, is like the reason that Spotify have not gotten rid of Joe Rogan, and the only way that they would get rid of Joe Rogan and the sort of partnership that they have with him, is if he was losing them more money than he was making them. And that is sort of actually, as I was writing the article, it was late this week, but turned out well, because more news broke as I was writing it. Spotify announced that they were going to add content warnings ahead of any podcast that deals with COVID-19. And then sort of you Google the company and you look at the way that their stocks were rising and falling. They had lost, I think it was like 7% in the days following Neil Young pulling his music. But then in the hours following them making that announcement about adding the content warnings, the stock had started to rise again. So all of the decisions that they are making are inherently financial, and they have their bottom line. That is what they have at heart. And then to give them the power to sort of decide what is and is not content that people can consume, and then decide what does and does not need a warning. I just think that is a lot of power to give to an individual corporation, especially because, the thing that makes their decisions is money.
All right, so for this week, I wrote my winter feature article, and I wrote about body image and how it's important to how it's important to try and combat society's beauty standards in order to kind of preserve your own personal body image, more specifically like a positive body image. And I feel the article spoke a lot about the barriers in society and within platforms like social media platforms, and why it's so important to value your own body and see those positive things when you're surrounded by a world where it's so easy to see the negative things. You guys both messaged me about reading it. How did you feel about that article?
I mean, like I told you, I thought it was very well done. You could sort of see the passion that you had about it, and like very, everything that you said was, accurate and true. Just sort of talking about like the mental health aspects of everything and body image. It was sort of a very relevant and just well-worded way of saying what you wanted to say.
Yeah, it was great to read so many people's kind of thoughts on it and their experiences with stuff too, because things like body image that people kind of struggle with internally, it's hard to feel that you're not kind of the exception. You know what I mean? Like you're not the person who has it the worst, or you're the only one struggling with X, Y, or Z. So just reading other people's thoughts that they shared with you is really interesting. So I enjoyed that aspect of it a lot. But yeah, I'd have to agree with Holly. There's a lot in here that is certainly accurate, right? Especially talking about body size and appearance versus health, which is a huge thing that is COVID's kind of thrown a loop into that, to be quite honest, right? Like people's perceptions of themselves as healthy or not kind of get thrown to the wind when facing something, a disease like that. You really don't know things that are underlying things you might be susceptible to or not. And body size can be deceiving for sure when it comes to health. And I think it seems like people are starting to kind of unravel that a little bit, but that's definitely still very much prevalent for sure.
Something that I didn't really talk about in the article that I, now looking back on it, maybe I could have talked about more, was like the age of social media. Yes, it can be very detrimental to one's like personal views on their body image, on a lot of like mental health issues. But I also think I should have mentioned maybe that like body dissatisfaction is kind of going down in a lot of places because of these platforms. Like, yes, these platforms are making it incredibly difficult for everyone to just kind of like accept their own bodies, but it's also a platform for people to express those things, and it's a platform for people to connect with other people who are in the same situations and learn and build to be better. So I feel like I could have touched on that a bunch now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, if I had to guess, not that you could really quantify this, but I would assume that body image is better off with social media than without, because you have that, well, like we were talking about with the last topic, you have the ability to upload your own content and engage in like smaller communities of people. And without social media, you really lack that kind of immediate feedback with like-minded and even not like-minded people. You were just kind of force-fed the content, like we talked about, that was pushing unrealistic beauty standards, right? You were just force-fed movies and TV, and that was kind of your exposure to celebrity culture. But now celebrity culture is so morphed with social media, and it's like you have micro celebrities and micro influencers, and all these people that are making a living online and kind of posting content in their kind of lane, so to speak, which can be fitness and can be wellness and can be body positivity stuff. And so, people have these smaller communities that they can be a part of that I feel like are doing more to benefit people than necessarily harm, when you have just the monolith of culture that everyone's consuming and everyone's looking at and comparing themselves to, right?
Yeah, and I think another great thing about social media is that it was able to create that platform, and it's almost like it's a fad right now. Like there's people on TikTok or Instagram and they're sharing photos, videos, stories about their life, their struggles, their difficulties, and like fighting these barriers. And that's kind of turned into this fad where everyone is now kind of voluntarily passing their stories and their their videos along, and everyone's kind of following the trend. I don't want to use the word trend, but I feel like it's kind of created not like an indiscreet kind of like movement, so I feel like that's a really great thing about social media, is that people are able to search or see it on their For You page or whatever, and then be able to relate to these things, and then maybe feel more confident about opening up about their struggles and their difficulties. And I feel like that's a really positive outcome of social media.
Yeah, I think like trend is like actually probably like a good way to put it, because there are definitely like positives and negatives to the way that sort of, I guess, body positivity and then like body neutrality and all of the sort of just like associated buzzwords that go with it are sort of taking over people's feeds. Because like obviously, of course, it is good that you can go onto Instagram and you can find someone who has a similar body type to you, someone who looks similar to you, somebody who maybe has like the same skin condition as you, and feel represented and see them being confident. But then there's also like this sort of part that goes along with it where people's bodies become a trend. So I guess like in the early 2000s it was like the sort of like the like, for lack of a better term, like this is genuinely what it was called, like the heroin chic look was to look sort of emaciated and thin and sort of not great. And then it was sort of like the Kardashian curves and people were getting sort of work done, and then I guess now you see people taking out implants to look thinner again. And it's just sort of, I think social media and media in general commodifies body types, and particularly women's body types, and puts it into a place where things can go in and out of style. And I think social media makes that trend cycle faster. You just see someone who has a desirable body type and all of a sudden they're the person that everyone should look like.
Now, there's also something that I've seen in my comparatively limited social media exposure, just even from like Instagram reels, is like occasionally you have people like fitness types or post a video of them like posing versus then them like allowing their kind of not tensing up their muscles and just kind of allowing themselves to sit comfortably how they do. And it's just that type of like peeling back the curtain essentially was definitely not happening before social media. You know what I mean? Like without, if you just had going strictly off like magazines or something like that, then you only had the finished product airbrushed photo, right? So it's interesting to have that level of like intimacy is not the right word, but like I don't even know what you'd call it, like it just connectedness with like the people that you're consuming the content of, like the inside kind of track with those people. Like, just because I think you're dealing with smaller scale things, right? Everyone's putting out their own content, so it's more democratized, as we said last topic. It's a little bit more. There's less gatekeepers, so you have kind of more of a direct connection with the people you're consuming the content of, and they tend to be a little more raw and open in that kind of environment, I feel like.
Yeah, I like that point. It's almost like the extended version of a movie. You get that little behind the scenes look at what it's kind of really like, and I really like that point.
And I think, like, again, not to like say that it's like a bad thing, but I think there can also be like a dangerous side of it where I guess on social media people have this idea that the people whose content they are consuming, whose photos they are looking at, that they are more real. And so, they'll post a thing where it's like, look at this is my body when it's real, this is my face when I'm not wearing makeup. But even then you're not getting like the full view of the human being. You don't really, for all they could be flexing something. They're still taking a picture at a flattering angle, something like that. So I think even then that can still sort of play into, I guess, just the way that people feel about themselves. And I think it's just like, I don't know, it's a much larger and weirder and like more nuanced issue than just like people, I guess, being more quote unquote real on social media, because nobody is actually real on social media.
You're absolutely right about that, is that it's always a lens, right? You always have to be weary of that lens. And something I mean, fantastic article, as I've said to you already, Morgan, but another angle I kind of thought about it while reading, when just kind of briefly touching on social media and stuff, is the people who are like pushing, you know, products and things, even in this maybe more relaxed environment on like presentation. There's still so many people pushing these nonsense products that are often not not approved for human consumption, and are, you know, meant to be diet pills or diet whatever, and it's really dangerous stuff. And there's a lot of that going on, and even those smaller time people who, as Holly said, can make you think that you're more connected to them, but they can still certainly sell you snake oil and sell you crap that might actually even be, you know, not just not work, but actually be harmful. So that's another angle of this that I think is interesting, and could easily be something for anyone to, you know, look into in the future as well, for future articles.
You know what? I might have to do an article about that next week, because I totally agree with that. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, I've had people, you know, slide into my DMs. Oh, we went to high school together. Oh, I'm a fitness trainer now, and I'll give you a deal, and I'll do all these things, and I'll help you get your, you know, your body where it wants to be. You don't even know me. How do you know where my body wants to be? Like, like a problem with these people pushing these products and stuff is that they think that they're doing something better with their body and their health and all these things than the people that they're pushing it to, and they want to not change us, but they think that we need to change. They think that they need to push these things on us to help this, you know, group of whatever people become like them, or become more, you know, so, oh, you'll look better, you'll be skinnier, you'll be prettier, like all these things. Oh, you need this cream so your hair is shinier, you need all these things. Why do I need to change? Why do you need to push these products on me? You don't even know who I am. So like, that's, oh, such a great point, Noah.
And I mean, most of the time they also don't even know what the products are that they're pushing, let alone know the person they're trying to sell it to. So many of those things have been recalled because, like the hair products, like you mentioned, a lot of that has caused people's hair to fall out, to change colors, unwanting, you know, colors that they didn't want it to change to. A lot of insane, crazy stuff, and then the company selling it just kind of pack up shop and, you know, go away, and they create another drop shipping business where they contact small fitness influencers with 1,000 followers, 2,000 followers, and get them to hawk their new product. Like, it's very dangerous and scary stuff, because you have them preying on people's insecurities, like you said, to sell things that are, you know, at best might make you feel, you know, might work as a placebo and make you feel like, you know, more eager to get after your goals or whatever, but at worst can actually harm you. So.
No, yeah, of course. It's just like, it's a crazy, crazy world. I know I've said that like every single time I've spoken, but like, it's brutal. Another example is those pants that have the shading kind of underneath the bottom, you know, so it's supposed to, you know, make your butt look bigger, make you look slimmer, like accentuate your curves, all these things. Why do I need pants like that? Why are you trying to sell me these pants that make you look really good? Because then I'm gonna buy them. I'm not gonna look the way you look. And now I'm probably just going to be mad at myself for not looking like that. Like, I just feel like there's so many flaws in all of these things, and it's just so bad for our mental health. But people have to make money, and that's what they know. You know, someone reached out to them and said, hey, I work for this company. Do you want to sell these products? You want to do that? And then that person got involved, and now this person is just like, well, I'm in this thing now. Like, I'm going to change people's lives, make them better. But who knows? It's just the way it works, I guess.
Yeah, we can convince ourselves of a lot of things if we want to. Anyways, Holly, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think like there's not really like an easy way to fix it. Like, people will talk about, like, I guess, the idea of having more like body diversity in like media and like following real people on social media. I don't think like consuming more media is the way that you solve the way that people feel about their bodies. I think the way that you do that is just like let people exist as they are. Like, you know, this is someone's body. What they do with it is their business and not yours. Even like the idea of like, you don't have to be thin to be healthy. Like for me, I'd be like, okay, well, nobody also like owes you their health. Their health is none of your business. So just, I guess, like letting people exist as they are. And I guess that includes like not putting people on a pedestal for the way that their bodies look. Yeah.
No, yeah, I think that really ties into kind of like my finishing point. Just like we will never be truly happy with ourselves if we can't accept that everyone just exists and everyone is different. And I feel like a lot of people feel the need to, you know, exist and prove other people wrong. But like at the end of the day, just be yourself. And, you know, you can't, why would you change to look like someone else who is probably unhappy too? Like everyone just needs to kind of accept that this is who we are. Actually, one of my contributors to my article, Dan, he had such a great perspective about just like there's things about yourself that you will never be able to change. And until he realized that these things will never change and I just need to love who I am, otherwise I'm never going to be happy. You know, like people are just constantly trying to change other people, and we can't. We all just need to mind our own business and leave everyone alone.
And I think also like along with that point is like understanding that there are things that also like will change, whether you know, have taken actions to make that happen or not. Like you've both seen me, I have green hair. That is something that I did on purpose. That didn't just grow out of my head. But also like people are gonna like, as they age, gain weight in different places, you know. People who are like capable of childbirth will get bigger hips as they age. And I think that's just something that like you just have to accept that people's bodies do that. People's bodies change, people fluctuate, their skin changes, their hair changes, and all of that is just like part of being a person. And you know, how someone else looks is none of your business when it comes down to it, unless you know they have made it your business.
No, of course. And another huge thing is, for example, Jennifer Aniston. She's like 50 years old and looks not a day older than 30, and she's slim and she's all these things. And I've heard my mom and her friends talking, oh, well, like we're the same age as her. We don't look like that. Like I'm going to buy her products, like her Vino line or whatever. And it's just like her body's completely different than yours. For example, my mom, you had 6 kids. How many kids did Jennifer Aniston have? You know, like people just need to accept that some people look a certain way and some people don't. And at the end of the day, like you're not going to feel any better about yourself obsessing over how somebody your age looks like this and you don't.
So that does it for another episode of The Latest. Thanks to Holly and Morgan for both of you for joining me to talk about your great articles this week. And thank you all for listening as well. We really appreciate your viewership. Remember that you can find the full articles we talked about here today and many, many more by going to our website, www.brockpress.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at The Brock Press. On top of following us on social media, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify. We haven't been taken down yet, so that's good. No COVID misinformation here. Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. Just be sure to look up The Latest, The Brock Press Podcast. You should find us with no issues. You can also find the podcast on our YouTube channel and on our website. So with all of that said, thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another episode.